It means let's be blind to black folk, pretend we don't see them. And they're hiding and smothering it again for you. And that's what it means. Now, where did that come from? It came from some of the white civil rights think tanks out of Washington. After the civil rights movement, what they wanted to do was say, let's bury the issue with black folk. And they gave our civil rights leaders a chance after the civil rights movement that made the difference. They didn't take it. Our black leadership displayed inappropriate behavior coming out of the civil rights movement. Throughout the civil rights movement, when they should have been focusing on the real issue, they didn't do it. Instead of focusing on correcting the historical damage that had been inflicted on black folk, they started messing around with civil rights and integration and never touched the problem. Ran all over the country, thinking that by taking down the signs over the water fountains or the bathrooms about colored only or black only, that they were dealing with racism. They didn't even touch racism. Racism was 3 stories down. Getting a black folk to sit in a white restaurant or sit on the front of a bus has no meaning at all. The second thing they did was they never had a plan. They ran all over the country from one demonstration, one march to the next one, never had a national plan about what they're going to do when they get there and what the next generation of blacks are going to do. And thirdly, they never built an institution to carry out a national plan. And when they did that, whites then changed their policy on blacks. They figured out black folk had displayed this inappropriate behavior and missed the boat. So what they did then, they said, let's put the moves on them. Johnson then wrote a law saying you got to correct the conditions of black folk in 1965, what's called the Affirmative Action Bill. When that came out, they put the moves on us to smother the issue again. Affirmative action was supposed to have been intended to correct those structural inequities between blacks and whites that have occurred as a direct result of all those years of things I'm talking about. As soon as the bill came out, whites immediately started changing it and black leadership bought it. The issue was supposed to be going this way. Watch how they flip the glasses upside down on you. The issue was supposed to be correcting historical what has happened to blacks historically by racism and discrimination. They switched and said, let's not talk about historical, let's talk about present day and the future. You're supposed to have been dealing with racism, which means group-based. They said, no, forget about that, let's deal with individual discrimination. The issue was supposed to have been focusing on dealing with things that have happened to black folk. They changed it, no, let's deal with issues pertaining to everybody. Women, gays, handicapped, everything else. And when they did that, they destroyed affirmative action. Don't even waste your time even chasing affirmative action anymore. It's been destroyed. It was supposed to be helping black folk. Now, what the other groups did, they said now that somebody put out a law to help black folk, how do we become equal to blacks? And that's when the Hispanics jumped up with this thing called Hispanic, the concept. Before that, we didn't have anything called Hispanic. But they thought in the early 60s that black folk might get some out of the civil rights movement. So what they did, they went to the table and came up with a whole term called Hispanic. They said, let's go all over the world and find everybody that speaks Spanish and pretend they're equal to black folk. And let's pretend that the Spanish language has been handicapped, Jim Crowed, enslaved, hung, lynched, decapitated, and everything else, and therefore is entitled to be treated like a black person. And they fabricated a new race called Hispanics. So now that means any person coming from Spain, Portugal, Philippines, any place, say, I'm a Hispanic, I'm equal to black folk. And the worst part about it, and then every time you hear a report about poverty, they'll go compare Hispanic poverty with black poverty. Nobody ever stops and hold a second, you got to quit playing that game, you're smothering the issue. The poverty on black folk is poverty that's been there for 400 years. That's the same old poverty they've been dealing with for 400 years, and you got rolling poverty. You keep having Hispanics coming into the country and comparing the poverty they're bringing into this country with the poverty that's been with black folk for 400 years. Nobody wants to stop them from doing that. Now people say, well, they got poverty. Yes, but that's poverty they bring in here with them. Black folk didn't bring poverty with them. It was given to us as a gift. If you were to go back to 1840s, where I was earlier talking about Uncle Tomism, back at that point in time, you did not have one single solitary Hispanic in the entire United States. But you had almost 5.5 million black folk. that were enslaved who had been enslaved for 250 years. You didn't have any Hispanics. By 1900, you had 100,000 Hispanics in the United States, but you got 11 million black folk. Now they got the same identical birth rate in 1900 up until today. Same identical birth rate. You got 100,000 Hispanics and 11 million black folk, and now they're going to pass black folk. Now somebody who can count past 3 should say, hold a second. How can you only have 100,000 of them in 1900 at the same birth rate, and you got 11 million blacks and now passing blacks? Because 2 million every year walking across the border. It is not this country's responsibility to be correcting all their poverty. It is the country's responsibility to correct the poverty they put on people. The poverty, and see, if you go through history, you cannot find one single solitary instance where anybody else in this country have been denied access to the educational system, to the economic system, to the political system, to the social system, but black folk. Don't you let anybody compare themselves with you. And that's why I said a few minutes ago, use terms that isolate you and reconnect you with your history and give you a special uniqueness so that nobody can piggyback off of you. Use the word non-immigrant. If you're going to do wrong right. If you want to insist, for those in the audience who want to insist on using the word minority, then at least qualify and say we're the only involuntary minority, or we're the only planned minority. But don't use this term where it means everybody collectively, because the whole concept of minority means to confuse the issue and defuse any resources you could have gotten. Now, where does that come from as a minority? Let's deal with that concept a second. Now, at this point in time, black people have to understand in America that if you go back to the Constitution I was talking to you about earlier, the Federalist Papers were the document upon which the Constitution was drafted. The Federalist Papers said this, that if you're going to have a social democracy where the rule is that the majority will win and the minority will lose, then the majority has some obligations. First of all, if you use that social democracy that we're currently using, the majority have these obligations. One, it is the majority's responsibility to protect the rights of the minority. It is not your right as a minority to keep going out here marching and demonstrating. It is the dominant white society to make sure you got everything you need. That's their obligation. Point 2 in the Federalist Papers that gave the structure for the Constitution, it also says that if you use a social democracy like we have in the United States, that you cannot do anything to stop the minority from becoming the majority. And immediately after that Constitution went into effect, within a year, they enacted the immigration law to put a zero quota on blacks to make sure they stay a minority. They violated the Constitution in 1 year to make sure that you become a permanent minority. And I have not heard one black legal scholar in the United States make that an issue. None of them made it an issue. That's inappropriate behavior on the part of our legal scholars in this country. And thirdly, in the Federalist Paper, it says, and if you fail to protect, the majority fails to protect the rights of the minority, and if you do something to impede the minority from becoming the majority the same way you became the majority, then thirdly, that minority has no rights to abide by your laws and your rulings. Now think about that. Now I want to know where are all my black scholars and my black legal minds. Why aren't you displaying appropriate behavior and investigating that? Find out why it is that you got the minority running around trying to protect itself when you know good and well it doesn't have the power and resources to do it. That's like trying to have a baby to look out for himself when you know he cannot go out and work a job and fix his own food. It's your obligation to take care of him. But nobody raised it as an issue in this country. Where all my black legal scholars should be raising issues over the fact that in this country, that the 13th Amendment that was given to black folk, that was supposed to free black folk, was never enforced. The Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to free blacks. That's what they say in the myth. But it wasn't. The Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln was only to free those blacks that he had no authority over in the first place. He was talking about the blacks who are any black who's in a state that broke away from the United States, you're free. He doesn't have the authority, just broke away. Now, the blacks he could have freed that were still in slavery on the north side, he didn't do anything about them. To this day, they never corrected that. So legitimately, they are still enslaved. Secondly, if you put out the 13th Amendment, freeing people, or let's go to the 14th Amendment. If you go to the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment saying they hereby, forbade any kind of involuntary servitude. Then they stuck a clause in there, except when duly have been prosecuted and charged. You know what that means? What that meant was then that any white in the South who wanted to re-enslave black folk, all they'd do is come up with a charge and he can re-enslave you. And what the South did immediately after the 14th Amendment went into process, they passed what's called a Black Codes in 1865 and 66. The Black Codes then said that any black person who used to be a slave, who's now free, he must be able to show me he has a contract for employment in his hand by the 1st of January. Or therefore I can arrest you and charge you with vagrancy and put you back into a plantation and slave you again. Now, all the people knew that. They didn't raise any cane about it. Today, that's still a part of our Constitution. I don't hear my black scholars. Where's the appropriate behavior? Now, why is that important now when I talk about appropriate behavior? Because now there's a bill on the Hill where some white conservatives now want to lay claim to the 14th Amendment and say they're going to write a law called Equal Opportunity Act. What they're going to say now is that bill can be used for whites too, so that you can now not infringe on their rights. And what black folks should have done is gone back to the Slaughterhouse case in 1872, which says that the 14th Amendment was strictly written for black people. That's what, see, in other words, whites are using the 14th Amendment for reverse discrimination charges against black folk. Now, you all follow me through on this. How can you allow somebody, if something is written on this side to help save you from this guy, how can you let him take the same law and knock your brains out on the other side with it? Am I losing you all on this now? But so how can whites come around now and claim use of the 14th Amendment that was written to protect black folk from whites? And now whites are taking it and use it to hit blacks with it. Where are my black lawyers and judges? And you got a black sitting on the Supreme Court now, it keeps ruling, talking about he's a constitutional authority based on the Constitution. I'm just telling you, the Constitution is knocking our brains out. I don't need no more Constitution. So, but all these questions need to be raised